Leaving America felt like escaping into freedom at first, but it didn't take long for everything to change. Moving abroad after leaving America often feels thrilling and completely life-changing at first. Yet over time, many Americans discover that freedom by itself doesn't always lead to lasting happiness. We uncover the emotional realities, unexpected struggles, and mindset shifts many Americans face after leaving the US, which eventually left some expats eventually feeling lost, disconnected, or emotionally drained abroad, as reflected in reports from Numbeo, Internations, and Expatistan. Watch until the end to discover why the freedom so many Americans chased overseas eventually stopped feeling like freedom at all. They thought a one-way ticket out of America would finally solve the emptiness they couldn't explain. For many Americans, leaving the US starts with a powerful feeling: escape. Escape from burnout, rising costs, toxic routines, political division, stress, or the constant pressure to keep grinding. The idea of waking up somewhere tropical, cheaper, slower, and more free feels like the answer to everything. And at first, it often does feel incredible. The sunsets feel brighter, the food tastes better, life suddenly seems lighter. Social media only adds to the fantasy. Expats posting beach laptops, luxury apartments for half the cost, and videos about finally being free. Slowly, people begin romanticizing expat life as if moving abroad automatically unlocks happiness, peace, and fulfillment. But after the excitement fades, reality quietly starts catching up. Some Americans discover they brought the same anxiety, loneliness, overthinking, or lack of direction with them. The scenery changed, but internally, very little did. The truth many expats struggle to admit is that a new country can distract you from your problems for a while, but it can't completely erase them. A lot of people unknowingly believe location creates happiness. They convince themselves that if they can just move far enough away from their old life, fulfillment will naturally appear. But eventually, daily life becomes normal again. Bills still exist. Relationships still require effort. Loneliness can still follow you across oceans. And this is where the biggest realization begins to hit. Freedom removes pressure, but it doesn't automatically create purpose. Without purpose, structure, community, or emotional grounding, even paradise can begin to feel empty over time. For some Americans abroad, the dream wasn't necessarily fake. It was simply incomplete. Don't miss the ending. It's where everything falls into place. By the time they arrived overseas, they have spent so much energy running from their old life that they never stopped to ask what kind of new life they actually wanted. For many Americans who move abroad, the decision begins with exhaustion. They're burned out from endless work schedules, high stress, expensive cities, and the feeling that life has become one long routine with no real meaning attached to it. Leaving feels less like a choice and more like survival. At first, the relief can feel overwhelming. No more brutal commutes, no more nonstop hustle culture, no more waking up anxious every Monday morning. For the first few months abroad, many expats feel emotionally lighter simply because the pressure they were carrying is finally gone. But over time, another problem slowly appears. They escape the old system, but never intentionally designed a new one. Some people leave America focused entirely on what they want to avoid: burnout, toxic jobs, unhealthy habits, stressful environments, or repetitive routines. But building a meaningful life requires more than escape. It requires direction. One expat explained it perfectly when he admitted, "I realized I was focused more on what I wanted to leave than what I wanted to build." That realization hits hard for many people living abroad. Without clear goals, purpose, relationships, or long-term vision, freedom can slowly turn into drift. Days begin blending together. Motivation weakens, Even beautiful places can start feeling emotionally flat when life lacks intention underneath the surface. This is one of the biggest mistakes many expats never expect. They assume removing stress automatically creates fulfillment, but removing something negative is not the same as creating something meaningful. Eventually, some Americans realize they didn't just leave behind a country or a job, they also left behind structure, identity, and direction. And without intentionally rebuilding those things, life abroad can start feeling surprisingly empty. Stick around and see how some expats lose structure after leaving the US. At first, having complete freedom felt like winning at life until the days started blending together in ways they never expected. One of the most overlooked struggles many Americans face after moving abroad is losing structure. Back in the US, life often revolves around schedules, responsibilities, routines, deadlines, and constant movement. People complain about the pressure, but those systems quietly provide rhythm and stability. When many expats leave America, that structure suddenly disappears. At first, it feels amazing. There's endless flexibility. You can wake up whenever you want, work less, travel often, and live without the rigid routines that once controlled your life. Every day feels open and unrestricted. For a while, that freedom feels healing, but eventually, too much openness creates a different kind of problem. Without realizing it, some expats slowly fall into a drifting lifestyle. Sleep schedules become inconsistent, productivity fades, goals become vague, days start feeling repetitive, even in beautiful places. Instead of intentionally building a life, they begin floating through one. And emotionally, that drift can quietly affect people more than they expect. One American living abroad admitted that after a year overseas, he started feeling strangely disconnected from himself. Nothing was technically wrong. He had freedom, good weather, lower expenses, and fewer pressures, but internally, he felt ungrounded. That's when he realized something important. Too much freedom, without structure, slowly turns into emotional instability. That sentence captures a reality many expats rarely talk about openly. Human beings often need some level of routine, responsibility, progress, and consistency to feel emotionally balanced. Freedom alone can feel exciting at first, but without direction and structure underneath it, life can slowly lose momentum. For some Americans abroad, the problem wasn't the country they moved to. The real issue was that in escaping pressure, they accidentally removed the systems that once gave their life stability, meaning, and forward movement. Keep watching and find out why you shouldn't mistake comfort for growth. The life they once dreamed about finally became real, but somewhere along the way, comfort quietly replaced growth. For many Americans who move abroad, one of the biggest rewards is finally escaping the intensity of life back home. Expenses are lower. The pace feels slower. There's less pressure to constantly compete, produce, and chase bigger goals. After years of stress and burnout, that kind of lifestyle can feel incredibly healing. And honestly, for a while, it is. Many expats settle into comfortable routines overseas. They find affordable apartments, favorite cafes, relaxing beaches, and quieter daily lives that feel far removed from the chaos they left behind in America. Financially and emotionally, life can feel easier, but over time, some people begin noticing something unexpected. Their life became more comfortable, but not necessarily more meaningful. One American living abroad explained that after 2 years overseas, he realized he had stopped challenging himself completely. He wasn't building anything new. He wasn't growing professionally, emotionally, or personally. Life felt stable, easy, and predictable, but also strangely stagnant. That's when he admitted something difficult. I became more comfortable, but not necessarily more fulfilled. That realization captures a hidden trap many expats slowly fall into. Comfort can sometimes create the illusion of happiness because it removes stress and discomfort. But growth usually requires challenge, uncertainty, effort, and forward movement. Without those things, life can slowly start feeling emotionally flat, even in beautiful surroundings. Some Americans abroad eventually realized they replaced one extreme with another. Back home, life felt too intense. Overseas, life became too passive. The balance they were truly searching for existed somewhere in between. This doesn't mean slower living is wrong. In many ways, it can be healthier and more peaceful. But peace alone doesn't automatically create purpose. A cheap lifestyle, relaxing routines, and endless comfort can make life easier. But if personal growth disappears in the process, fulfillment often fades quietly alongside it. And for many expats, that realization doesn't happen immediately. It happens slowly, over time. Don't go anywhere. We're talking about why underestimating isolation abroad spells total disaster. The hardest part of living abroad wasn't the culture shock, the language barrier, or the distance. It was realizing how alone they actually felt. When many Americans first move overseas, loneliness is the last thing they expect. Everything feels exciting in the beginning. New cities, new experiences, new people, and the thrill of building a different life can make the world feel wide open. At first, being far from home even feels liberating, but eventually, the emotional distance starts becoming real. Family milestones happen without you. Friends back home slowly move on with their lives. Time zone differences make conversations shorter and less frequent. Months pass quickly, and before long, some expats realize they've become emotionally disconnected from the people who once knew them best. At the same time, building deep relationships abroad can be harder than expected. Many expats make surface-level connections, people to travel with, grab dinner with, or spend weekends around. But deeper emotional bonds often take years to develop. In some cases, friendships remain temporary because people are constantly moving between countries. Visas expire, or lifestyles change quickly. That's when emotional loneliness quietly begins setting in. One American living overseas described the feeling perfectly when he said, "Freedom feels different when you realize you have nobody deeply connected to your everyday life." That realization hits harder than many people expect, because loneliness abroad doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes life still appears beautiful on the outside. The photos still look amazing. The lifestyle still seems exciting. But internally, some expats begin feeling emotionally untethered, like they exist between worlds without fully belonging anywhere. For many Americans abroad, this becomes one of the biggest emotional wake-up calls of all. Freedom can feel empowering when shared with meaningful relationships, but without deep connection, even the most beautiful lifestyle can eventually start feeling emotionally empty and difficult to carry alone. Make sure to watch all the way through and see how some expats living abroad find themselves drifting without purpose. At some point, the adventure stopped feeling like freedom and started feeling like they were simply wandering without direction. For many Americans living abroad, the early stages of expat life are filled with excitement and movement. New countries, new experiences, and endless flexibility create the feeling that life has finally opened up. Every month feels different. Every place feels fresh. And for a while, that constant change feels deeply rewarding. But eventually, the excitement begins fading into repetition. Some expats slowly fall into a lifestyle that looks exciting from the outside, but feels strangely empty underneath. The cafes change, the apartments change, the countries change, but emotionally, life begins repeating itself in cycles. Wake up, work remotely, explore, socialize casually, move somewhere new, repeat. At first, endless wandering feels freeing because there are no limits, obligations, or fixed expectations. But over time, the absence of direction can quietly become exhausting. One American who had spent years moving between countries described the moment everything shifted for him. He realized he had spent so much time designing the perfect lifestyle that he never stopped to ask what deeper purpose it was all connected to. That's when he admitted, "This was the moment I realized I had built a lifestyle, but not a meaningful life." That realization can be deeply unsettling for many expats abroad, because a meaningful life usually requires more than freedom, travel, and flexibility. It often requires commitment, long-term goals, contribution, relationships, growth, and something larger than personal comfort. Without those things, life can slowly begin feeling emotionally hollow, no matter how beautiful the surroundings are. For some Americans overseas, this becomes the biggest wake-up call of all. They achieved the freedom they once dreamed about, but somewhere along the way, they lost a sense of direction. And without a bigger purpose anchoring their life, even freedom itself eventually started feeling empty. You'll want to see what happens when you expect geography to permanently fix your personal problems. Thousands of miles away from America, they finally discovered the one thing they could never escape: themselves. For many Americans who move abroad, there's an unspoken belief hiding underneath the excitement. The idea that a new country will somehow create a new internal life. People imagine that changing environments will permanently erase stress, burnout, anxiety, emptiness, or dissatisfaction. And for a while, it can feel true. A different culture, slower pace, cheaper lifestyle, and fresh surroundings often create temporary emotional relief. Life feels lighter because the old pressures are gone. But eventually, many expats experience something unexpected. The burnout slowly returns. Not always in the same form, but emotionally, the familiar feelings begin resurfacing. Restlessness, overthinking, loneliness, lack of direction. Emotional habits that existed back in America quietly reappear overseas because internal patterns rarely disappear just because the scenery changes. Some people also begin struggling with identity confusion. Back home, their identity may have been connected to career, achievement, routines, or social circles. Abroad, those structures often disappear. At first, that feels liberating, but over time, some expats begin asking difficult questions about who they actually are without those external labels. One American living overseas explained the realization in a way that deeply resonated with other expats. "Eventually, I realized I brought myself with me." That sentence captures the emotional truth many people don't fully understand before moving abroad. A new country can absolutely change your environment. It can improve your quality of life, lower stress, and create incredible experiences. But geography alone cannot permanently solve internal struggles that were never fully addressed to begin with. And that's when he finally understood. Leaving America gave me freedom, but freedom alone wasn't enough. Honestly, this is the mistake I think most people make when moving abroad. They expect external change to create internal peace automatically. But eventually, many discover that fulfillment depends less on where you live and more on who you become while living there. What we reveal to be the reason why the freedom living overseas eventually stopped feeling like freedom, for some Americans, might be something you never expected. They finally understood that freedom didn't fail them. They misunderstood what freedom was supposed to do. It wasn't because living abroad failed. It was because they confused escape with intentional living. Freedom without purpose slowly turns into drift. Comfort without growth becomes stagnation. Flexibility without structure leads to emotional instability. And independence without connection eventually becomes loneliness. That's why so many Americans abroad quietly reach the same realization. The biggest mistake Americans make abroad is building a life around escaping pressure instead of creating meaning. At first, escaping pressure feels like success, but over time, escape alone cannot hold a life together. What actually creates a good life abroad isn't just what you leave behind, it's what you intentionally build. The three things freedom actually needs are simple, but often ignored. First is purpose, something meaningful to build, contribute to, or grow toward. Second is structure, because routines create emotional stability even in the most beautiful places. And third is connection, because freedom feels empty without belonging. The people who truly thrive abroad aren't just escaping America, they're intentionally building a life they actually want. They don't rely on geography to fix everything. They combine freedom with direction, flexibility with discipline, and independence with real relationships. Leaving America can absolutely change your life, but eventually, freedom stops being enough. Explore our other videos for deeper, real-world stories from long-term expats, sharing what it's really like to build a life abroad and redefine what home means.